If you've browsed YouTube in the hope of finding sounds to study, work, or relax to, then you're probably familiar with the term lo-fi. That's mostly thanks to a number of popular channels that live stream instrumental hip-hop for hours on end. The hazy, anime-infused aesthetics and laid-back sounds have become synonymous with the term lo-fi in recent years, but they're a far cry from its roots. You see, lo-fi is less of a musical genre and more of a style. The term was coined by the American radio DJ William Berger. In 1986, Berger used to dedicate a weekly segment of his program to home-recorded music under the name lo-fi, an abbreviation of low fidelity. But the concept existed many years prior to that and was arguably invented during the height of 1960s psychedelia at the tail end of the Summer of Love. The Beach Boys' 1967 album Smiley Smile was a stripped-back, home-recorded style session that's often described as the first lo-fi album ever. Where Brian Wilson had raised the group's profile with his meticulous production methods on Pet Sounds, Smiley Smile was the Beach Boys in raw form. This reduced approach would soon become a template for a new DIY style of music production, paving the way for garage rock, punk, and singer-songwriters like R. Stevie Moore and Daniel Johnston. With recording studios being off limits to most because of the cost, a generation of artists found that they could make their mark by grabbing a basic tape recorder and knocking songs together from their bedrooms instead. This meant that you no longer had to be signed to a record label to release your music. All you needed was an idea, a couple of cheap bits of equipment, and some distribution. Fans welcomed the trend, and tape cassette culture boomed through the 70s and 80s. This no-frills process would redefine much of the musical landscape towards the end of the 20th century. Though in the 80s and 90s lo-fi was often adopted as a term to describe alternative guitar bands, the DIY ethos it was underpinned by inspired artists from many genres. In early 90s Memphis, a small community of rap groups began carving out their own take on the style, producing a raw, minimalist sound that you'd only discover if you got hold of one of their rare cassette tapes. Among its key proponents were DJ Paul of 3-6 Mafia, DJ Spanish Fly, and Tommy Wright III. Through the 2000s, lo-fi went through an evolution. One of its key faces at the time was Ariel Pink, an R. Stevie Moore fanatic who'd spent years recording home demos of weird pop radio-indebted songs. Pink's music highlighted his affection for bygone sounds and technologies, and it laid the foundations for what would become known as chillwave. Making use of cheap vintage synthesizers and hardware, this new lo-fi sound fused elements of psychedelia, indie and dreamy pop, captured through a nostalgic lens. The chillwavers were enamored with 80s pop culture, and the music reimagined it for a generation that still remembered MySpace and iPods. Though chillwave would never be more than a fringe movement, it signaled a global musical shift from a world of guitars to one of electronica, where electronic productions were set to take center stage. The 2000s era in the story of lo-fi is one of change. With high-quality recording equipment becoming increasingly more affordable because of technological advances, lo-fi has become less about DIY and more about nostalgia. While the lo-fi pioneers had broken new grounds by producing music with whatever they could get their hands on, newer artists have aimed to reinterpret the sounds of the past by seeking out expensive vintage equipment. Driven more by sentimentality as opposed to a limit on resources, lo-fi has now become a popular stylistic choice that spans art forms beyond just music. Although for many it will continue to be characterized by the technology and aesthetics of the past, its history is sure to inspire a new wave of creators eager to express themselves with whatever tools are at their disposal.